The top leaders of China's ruling Communist Party are holding a key meeting that's expected to further tighten President Xi Jinping's grip on power. Behind closed doors, Xi is set to lay the groundwork for an unprecedented third term in office that would cement his position as China's most powerful leader in recent history.
Chinese President Xi Jinping hasn't left China for over 21 months, partly because of COVID-19, but also because he's focused on building his power base at home. The upcoming plenum is an opportunity to set the tone in his bid to become China's long-term ruler. His message is that China is a superpower and the rest of the world better know it. The Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, oppress or enslave us. Anyone who dares try to do that will have their heads bashed and bloodied against the Great Wall of Steel, forged by over 1.4 billion Chinese people. The plenum gathers 370 top Communist Party cadres from politics and the military. The most important item on the agenda is a resolution looking back at key events in the party's 100-year history. It gives the party the ability to shape the narrative of its history as it sees fit and enshrine President Xi's role as leader. It's only the third time this has happened. The previous two resolutions were introduced by the founder of the People's Republic of China, Mao Zedong, and the architect of the economic reforms that boosted the economy, Deng Xiaoping. Xi wants to show that he's an equally important leader, transforming China into a global power. He wants to make his power felt across all of Chinese society. He has boosted the military and launched a crackdown that has muzzled tech tycoons like Alibaba's Jack Ma. In recent weeks, Xi has been stepping up pressure on the sovereign island of Taiwan, which China considers its own, and the world is watching to see how tensions unfold. The plenum, which runs until Thursday, lays the groundwork for the crucial 2022 Party Congress, where Xi is expected to secure his position for at least another 5 years. He faces challenges. Economic growth is slowing down amid an energy crunch, supply chain disruption, and fears of a crisis in the country's real estate sector. Challenges that need to be overcome if he is to prove himself equal to Chairman Mao and Deng Xiaoping.
Latest news out of China. China triggers growing fears for U.S. military. China has upped nuke production. It worried the United States would start war before the 2020 election, report says. This is the latest news. The Hill headliner. China triggers growing fears for U.S. military, dated November 7, 2021. China's military buildup and its push to develop nuclear-capable missiles is unnerving Congress and U.S. defense officials alike. America's defense establishment has watched threats from Beijing rapidly grow in multiple areas, including recent hypersonic missile tests, an expanding nuclear arsenal, strides in space and cyber, and seemingly daily threats to Taiwan. Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley said Wednesday, "We're witnessing one of the largest shifts in global geostrategic power the world has witnessed. They are clearly challenging us regionally, and their aspiration is to challenge the United States globally. The potential shift in the global balance of power is worrisome to U.S. officials and lawmakers. For decades, America has held the stance of the world's foremost economic and military power. The shift to China, while not a direct threat, could upend alliances in the Indo-Pacific region at a time when U.S. and Chinese militaries increasingly butt heads in the South China Sea." Outgoing Joint Chiefs of Staff General John Hyten last week said the pace at which China is developing nuclear capabilities is stunning, and on track to surpass the United States if they don't do anything about it. A major example of the speed at which Beijing is moving was a test in August of a hypersonic weapon that partially orbited Earth, re-entered the stratosphere, and rocketed toward its target, which it missed by less than 30 miles. General Milley called the test very concerning, very close to being a Sputnik moment, referring to the Soviet Union's 1957 launch of the world's first space satellite that gave Moscow a lead in the space race and shocked the United States. China has maintained that the test was a spacecraft and not a missile. Wednesday, Miley called the launch indicative of a much, much broader picture of a military capable with respect to the Chinese. He also went on to say, today, China has capabilities in space and cyber, land, sea, air, and undersea, and they are clearly challenging us regionally. So we have a case here for a country that's becoming extraordinarily powerful that wants to revise the international order to their advantage. That's going to be a real challenge over the coming years, of the next 10 or 20 years. That's going to be really significant for the United States. The view was reflected in the Pentagon's latest report on China's military power, released on Wednesday. China, since 2018, has been named as the top defense threat to the country along Russia, but its latest advancement had congressional Republicans this week sounding the alarm on its growing threat. Senate Armed Forces Committee James Inhofe said in a news conference on Tuesday, "We are in the most, I believe, the most endangered position our country has ever been in terms of what China is demonstrating, clearly what they have the capability of doing." After the Pentagon's report, Mike Rogers, ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, said in a statement that the U.S. needs to respond to China with unprecedented defense modernization. He also went on to say, the report should crystallize for the Biden administration what has been self-evident for some time, that China poses a real and imminent threat. Kicking the can down the road for our military modernization is no longer an option. Analysts have also picked up on China's growing nuclear capabilities, with the Federation of American Scientists on Tuesday releasing a report detailing 3 apparent missile silos that are in development in the cities of Yumen, Hami, and Ordos. Hans Christensen, one of the authors of the AFS report, told The Hill that Washington should be more concerned about Beijing modernization its military on the conventional side, which doesn't involve nuclear weapons. He also went on to say, especially short of vis-a-vis Taiwan, but of course also in the South China Sea, because those are areas in which a conventional war could erupt or clash, and how the situation could sort of erupt an escalation into potential use of nuclear weapons. But of course, it takes that conventional war to break out first. Experts and officials worry that China's growing military might is indicative of plans to eventually seize control of Taiwan, the self-governed island that Beijing views as a rogue part of its territory. That concern has increased in recent months as Beijing has amped up its provocations against Taipei, flying warplanes into its air identification zone 150 times over the course of about 4 days in early October. The presence of U.S. forces on the island, including those meant to train Taiwanese troops, has since been revealed. Senior U.S. military officers, including Miley, numerous times this year warned that China in several years could make a bid for the island. Concern repeated on Thursday by a top Taiwan security official. National Security Bureau Director General Ming Song said that China has intentionally and internally considered attacking Taipei's Pratas Islands, but said it would hold off on the move until 2024, according to the Reuters news agency. General Miley on Wednesday said China wouldn't make a move in the near future, but anything can happen. Complicating matters is Washington's long-held pledge to help Taiwan defend itself in such an attack, while it's unclear on what exactly it would do to deter China, a scenario that could trigger a conflict between the two superpowers. The U.S. has operated under a policy of strategic ambiguity with Taiwan, providing it defensive arms and allowing for unofficial relations, but not supporting its independence. President Biden on October 21st appeared to take a firmer stance when he said that the U.S. government has a commitment to protect Taiwan, but the White House quickly walked that back and said U.S. policy was not changing. It remains to be seen how the Pentagon intends to tackle the challenge, but it's unlikely to feature heavily in its soon-to-be-released nuclear posture review, part of the Biden administration's national defense strategy, as well as upcoming missile defense review. NBC News headliner: China has upped nuke production. It worried that the U.S. would start a war before the 2020 election, a report recently says. China has accelerated its nuclear weapons production, expanding its missile program, was worried the United States would start a war before the 2020 election, according to a new Pentagon report. The report also notes that Defense Secretary Mark Esper directed Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley to make a reassuring phone call to his Chinese military counterparts in the run-up to the election, which was among several calls Milley made to China that later sparked accusations from Republicans that he was disloyal to then President Trump. The report, called Military and Security Developments Involving the People's Republic of China, says China could have 700 nuclear warheads by 2027 and at least 1,000 by 2030. Last year's report said China had a nuclear stockpile of about 200 warheads, and that could double over the next decade. Senior defense officials said China's growing nuclear arsenal exceeds expectations from the 2020 Pentagon China report, but denied that the current trajectory would put China on parity with the U.S. for a number of nuclear warheads by the end of this decade. China may already have a nuclear triad, the annual report says, including a nuclear-capable air-launched ballistic missile and both ground and sea nuclear capabilities. China is also constructing the infrastructure necessary to support the major expansion of its nuclear forces, according to a Pentagon fact sheet about the report. The report also details how China believed there was a significant threat from the U.S. during the second half of 2020, including the possibility Washington would start a military conflict in the final days before the presidential election. Widespread speculation in the Chinese media said that the U.S. would deliberately instigate a conflict in the South China Sea led to large-scale military drills, increase in readiness by the Chinese military, and additional deployments, according to a Pentagon fact sheet about the report. As tensions mounted, according to the report, Esper directed General Milley and the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for China to reach out to their Chinese counterparts to address their concerns. The calls occurred on October 20th and October 30th, 2020. The spokesman for the Chinese Ministry of National Defense told reporters on October 29th, 2020, that Esper used official channels to reassure the People's Liberation Army, China's military, that the U.S. had no intention of instigating a military crisis against China. China continues to expand its ballistic missile arsenal and is developing a new intercontinental ballistic missile, the ICBM, that will require increased nuclear warhead production because of new re-entry vehicles, according to the report's executive summary. China currently has about 100 ICBMs and is building at least 3 new solid fuel ICBM silo fields that could contain hundreds of new ICBM silos that could indicate that it is on the verge of a large expansion of its ballistic missile force, the report says. Speaking at the Aspen Security Forum in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday morning, General Milley told Lester Holt of NBC News that he does not think a military conflict between China and Taiwan is likely in the near future, specifically saying it is unlikely in the next 6 months to 2 years. General Milley did say that the Chinese are clearly and unambiguously building the capabilities necessary to invade Taiwan and acknowledge that anything can happen. That's the latest news. Now my thoughts. The worry over China is overblown. And that is because the United States itself is a very jealous country when it comes to production, whether from the first world to third world countries, which are trying to build themselves up from the ground, and that sometimes building out of the rubble that the U.S. and their coalition partners have constructed for them in previous coups or wars. China, about 20 years ago, White House officials were worried about China and the tensions were rising. Even before the attacks of September 11th, the Bush administration was more worried about the advent of another Cold War than they were about radical fundamentalism, Islamic radical fundamentalism. which was the excuse given by the Bush administration in their ignorance regarding why the attacks happened in the first place. But China still wasn't a threat to them even back in 2001. And when the U.S. troops deployed to Afghanistan and into the Middle East, the challenge posed by China was set aside until the present moment. And that's because we don't have another enemy which has replaced the radical fundamentalists. Unlike back in the 1970s and 80s, and even previous, where communism was a longstanding threat to the global superpower of the United States, Soviet Union was indeed that challenge. And look what happened. No, we didn't go to war with them, but we came very close. And to replace the advent of the threat of communism, we supported an ideology which suppressed the aspirations of communism, and that was radical fundamentalism, in which we instigated this ideology by giving them weapons and funding and training through a CIA operation called Operation Cyclone, which involved the Gulf, Pakistan, Great Britain, Israel, and the coalition partners. The problem with that was the United States truly, according to its own State Department, was truly ignorant about Islamic radical fundamentalism. And I believe that's true, but I don't believe it to be a shock for the CIA or the Pakistan ISI. The problem here is that once radical fundamentalism was beaten, in which the only threat now comes from Islamic Khorasan in Afghanistan, which is not an international threat. What is now the next threat for the United States? Well, they have to manufacture one in order to explain the bloated Pentagon budget, and so that their officials can beg for more money at a Senate Appropriations Committee. With China involving their allies, and includes of trade, key European allies see the United States as being confrontational with China and don't believe that they can afford to be quite so confrontational alongside them. And that's because they know that the regional allies for China, which are the Soviet Union, North Korea, could pose a tremendous direct threat to those who are affiliated with the antagonists, which is the United States. And Europe, with a shrinking share of the global economic pie, Europe finds itself developing dependent on China for trade. And when you have countries that, a country like the United States, which loves to endorse economic sanctions on its preconceived enemies, like Iran, Iraq, Syria, it worries many European allies because nobody really wants to go to war. I mean, it is the last resort, but the United States seems to not know anything about hegemony or peace. And that's because it's indicative of the people who are in power. And that's why there is no dissenting opinion regarding the Democrats and Republicans, because they're led by, or they're influenced by, the corporate lobbyists from the military industrial complex, as well as foreign lobbyists, including the Gulf and Israel. These are countries that know nothing about peace. And if you look at the histories of these countries, you'll notice one glaring consistency, and that is, for the most of their existence, they've been in conflict with an external entity. And the ignorance regarding the politicians in this country, regarding their citizenry or their voting bloc and how they treat them, should be a glaring red flag for the American people. It is to the rest of the world. They see us as being completely ignorant. And can you blame them? We are so saturated and entertained by the simplistic nature of sports and reality TV that it takes away our attention from the more important instances and news that is happening in their name. Now, the Biden administration, for their credit, is still at an arm's length of a conflict with China. And I think they know that to engage that would be World War III immediately. Now, we have a couple of regional adversaries that, could pose a threat to the economic status of the United States and anybody affiliated with it. And that is Iran, North Korea, and China. Either we revisit the Cold War or we revisit the Middle East conflict. And to the Pentagon, it doesn't matter because they're biting at the chomps about wanting a conflict. Now, which one would be beneficial? Well, that depends on the lobbyists, wouldn't it? How horrifying is that? To know that war hangs on the balance of those who could profit off it. And if we don't do anything about it, we will be to blame in the annals of time.